This is a Clutch Pick Sports Betting Podcast, Week 17, NFL Picks Edition. My name is Sheldon Alexander, and of course, I'm joined by my dude, Mr. Matt Russell, here as we're winding down the NFL season. And last week was a weird one. I'm going to be honest with you. Finished with a 7-8-1 record, which was weird because there was we were up and then we were down and then Christmas happened. And yeah, I don't know what happened on Christmas Day. We shall discuss that and more. But either way, I am here with you, Mr. Matt Russell, to discuss as the season total sits at 119, 114, and 7. The goal continues to try to get back to respectability. We have 2 weeks left to do it. I'm fired up. I feel good about it. I feel like we can pull this off. I feel like we will do this. But after the holiday season, my friend, because I know there's family time, there's food, there's football, there was lots of football. But overall, as we wind down 2023, how are you feeling, my dude?
Well, how I'm feeling relative to sort of just where I'd like to be is there's kind of a disparity there, to be completely honest. You said it's week 17, I feel like I have week 17, like it's some sort of, disease or something. Week 17, COVID-19, somewhere, in between there. Or maybe it's just, multiple days of getting, a little too deep into the bourbon scene out with the townspeople. So, whether it's lingering effects of that, or just, week 17, just getting to the point where, listen, I'm old enough to remember going to a Chargers-Steelers game on New Year's Eve, and that was the last game of the regular season. And it's like, no, there's still another one to go after this year's New Year's Eve slate that we have on tap, right? And it's just like, okay, I guess if we have to. I right along with you there around just sort of under 500, like you mentioned. Yeah, I think I had the first, I know I had the first 3 right last week, Thursday and the 2 Saturday games. And then for some reason, some way, somehow, still, unsure days later of how this happened, but the Packers didn't cover and the Jets didn't cover. So I ended up right around just a little bit below 500 with you there in week 16. So you can't, beat yourself too much, this point in the season. There's a lot of weird stuff going on. So we'll dive into it here with week 17's weirdness. And of course, next week's week 18 weirdness.
Yeah, two things, actually, now that I think about it. I was convinced that last week was the second last week of the season until Sunday. And I was like, wait, there's still 2 more weeks of the NFL season? Hold on. Yeah. 2, I need to write this down somewhere and remind myself for next year. Because I'm pretty sure next year Christmas is on a Wednesday.
Yeah, midweek.
So first off, the NFL most definitely will find a way to have Christmas Day games, right? Even if it is on a Wednesday.
No. I want to say no.
If teams play on Saturday already, right? They can play. If you play Sunday to Thursday, you could play Saturday to Wednesday.
I think you just go. I think they've got.
It's the start. Hold on, and it's the start of week 18.
No, I understand that. I just think you just go. You leave that alone because this war that they're having with the NBA for Christmas, I don't think is really they're not trying to steal Christmas. It's just I don't know. Maybe this is long time watching the sport and watching the league and knowing that when it doesn't fall on Sunday, or Monday, they don't mess with it. I'd like to think that it'll be there'll be a Thursday game, Boxing Day for those of us here in Canada. That's hopefully as far as they go. I can't imagine them stretching it to
So, okay. Well, either way, the point that I was thinking about, which we can, on the future iteration of said podcast, whenever there are games on Christmas Day, right, my focus will be, is there a disadvantage to playing at home on Christmas Day? Meaning, are you dealing with family more? Is there just more going on? You're not as locked in on the game as you would be if you were on the road, because clearly it's easier for you to separate from what's going on because you're traveling. There's just, you're not in your bed. You're not with your fam. You're just doing stuff.
Yeah.
And NFL is a different game. But anyways, topic for another day. well, next year on Christmas Day, but we get all that fun stuff. Either way, trying to finish off the season strong as we normally do here. And we begin on Thursday night, as we normally do here, as the Jets at the Browns. Browns at home, favored by 7.5 points. That to me is a whole lot of points for, hey, Joe Flacco's been doing well. He's been doing a really good job. I still don't know that I'm at the point where I can lay 7.5 points with Joe Flacco and the Browns. Now, I said that last week. I know it wasn't 7.5, but it was a lot. And I was like, can't really do this. But I'm here again. And I'm not going to be able to do it with Joe Flacco, despite the fact that I think I have to start Joe Flacco in the fantasy football finals because I can't wait out to see what's going on with Trevor Lawrence.
After all this fantasy football complaints about quarterbacks and this, that, or whatever this season from you, to just throw out the major finals anyway is, just really an appalling humble brag at this.
Puka, man. Shouts to Puka and Kyron Williams.
Fair enough. Thursday night game. Yeah, man, 7.5. Like, that's too many points, right? Like, I don't know. I don't think it's that complicated as far as, this is a Browns team that doesn't score necessarily a ton. And, you look at the total, which is around 35 points, and you got a total that low, right? Every point becomes that much more valuable because if the expectation is 35 points, a higher percentage of the points are needed in order to cover this type of a number, right? So little mathematics there for everybody.
Quick math.
Yeah, exactly. Still unsure, at least as of this discussion, whether Amari Cooper is going to play. Obviously, that's a pretty big deal, at least for no other reason, but you get to sort of send him off with Sauce Gardner and let them kind of do battle for a little while. I think that's kind of, for me, the key to this game, where Flacco kind of wants to throw to two guys, right? He wants to throw it to Cooper, and he wants to throw it into David Njoku, and that's kind of the list. And so if he can't, either because Cooper is not playing or because he is compromised, or combination with the fact that he's got to deal with Sauce Gardner. I think that we're not going to see the Browns just rack up points the way that we saw it last week. It's going to look a lot more like the previous 2 weeks against Jacksonville and Chicago, where Flacco is certainly capable of turning the ball over. That hasn't changed since the old days of Joe Flacco. And the Jets defense, especially their pass rush, their defensive line, etc., is the best group that Flacco has faced in this 3-game winning streak, right? Jacksonville, Chicago, literally in the bottom 5 when it comes to getting pressure on the quarterback this season. And their opponent last week, Houston, didn't have Will Anderson and weren't particularly good at getting pressure, even at the best of times from a team perspective, right? It was kind of, for them, Will Anderson and nothing else. And they didn't have Will Anderson last week. So, you throw in the sort of indoor, Flacco can kind of throw it around without any sort of, weather conditions or anything like that. Like, yeah, okay, makes sense that the Browns offense was able to do some stuff. Their defense obviously played much better last week than they had previously done so on the road, but they'd also been, they were also playing Case Keenum, which we had high hopes, or at least middle hopes. We had mid hopes for Case Keenum in his second game. This guy's a professional quarterback who has been to an NFC championship game, right? So, he ends up stinking, doesn't make it through the end of the game. We get, your man Davis Mills back in our lives. So all that is to say, I think this, the idea of the Browns, they can clinch a playoff spot and it'll be at home and the place will be rocking and all these sort of theoretical things that you kind of just mentioned with regards to these holiday games, right? And as you mentioned it, I just sort of thought to myself, in the 7 holiday games, including the Black Friday games, I believe the road team was 6-1 against the spread, with just the hot garbage Commanders being the only team that didn't cover, right, on the road against Dallas in that Thanksgiving game. So, yeah, you said, again, we don't know whether we're going to need that type of information for next year on Christmas, but at least that's something kind of interesting, obviously a small sample size. So, does this game kind of act, at least in the market, as kind of this holiday concept where it's all about the Browns and the Browns clinching this playoff spot, and Kevin, all of a sudden everyone on the team has a piece of an award, right? Stefanski, Coach of the Year, favorite or co-favorite, depending on where you look. Myles Garrett, co-favorite or favorite, depending on where you look, for Defensive Player of the Year. And then Joe Flacco, if you remove the DeMar Hamlin situation, he is the quote-unquote, second choice in the comeback player of the year all of a sudden. right? It's like the Browns just going to win all these awards. Like, I don't know that they're just going to sweep these sort of secondary awards. Not the Defensive Player of the Year is necessarily a secondary award here, but it'll be interesting to see kind of this battle for the Browns on which one of those three entities kind of makes their final case. Maybe it's all three and they cover this game and they win this game easily, right? But I think between these two teams, knowing that this game is going to be a highly defensive, low scoring type of a game, it doesn't take all that much. Maybe it's a pick six, maybe it's a Joe Flacco fumble, right? For the Jets to be able to stay in this game. And this number listen, the advanced line last week was -6. My number for it was 5.5, and that's based on like a market rating. My number in my own ratings, because I have the Jets rated maybe a little bit higher than the market does with Trevor Siemian, even though, listen, who knows if that's ever going to be a good idea. And maybe I haven't gotten all that crazy when it comes to bumping the Browns up just yet. I have it at like 4, right? And like, this is week 17. There's going to be some weird disparities that maybe make sense. Maybe some of them don't. But for me, once this got to 7.5, I was just like, okay, well, that's just a bet, right? Like, like -6 is like, oh God, not really. And 7 is like, sure, but at 7.5, you're just like, yeah, fine, give me flat 7.5. Like, I don't know what that's necessarily about. Again, especially with a questionable Amari Cooper. But yeah, we'll take the points with the Jets here. And just another absolute gem to finish things off Thursday Night Football this season.
Speaking of weird primetime games, instead of Monday Night Football, we get Monday Night Football on Saturday. Yes, Monday Night Football, but it's on Saturday. No actual Monday night game this week. Okay, right. Cool. We got the Lions at the Cowboys. Cowboys at home and favored by 6 points in this one. I got to be honest. I was initially going to be on the Lions on this one, but the fact that I feel like the Lions had their big celebration is obviously they clinched their division for the first time in forever last week. Hey, we're great. We're happy. We're feeling good. Cool. But now you come in this week into a game that you might not really need, and you definitely don't need as much as the Cowboys need this game. And the Cowboys coming off a loss last week, they're back home where they're a lot more comfortable. We know how much better they play. And you're still giving me under a touchdown here. I think this is just a matter of who needs this game more is where I'm leaning on this. But again, it's 6 points, and that's a lot. So I could be talked out of it.
Well, it's funny, right? The idea of like, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? This is a need is in the eye of the beholder situation. Because with that loss last week to Miami and then Philadelphia, kind of phoning in the second half against the Giants and winning that game, I would say to you, like, what do the Cowboys need out of this game? Like, realistically speaking, right? Because they can look across and see that the Eagles the next day are playing the Cardinals, right? And as much as the Cowboys lost to the Cardinals, they're not expecting the Eagles to lose that game. And then they see them playing the Giants in week 18, if that game even ends up mattering, right? And so they go, okay, like, they're not losing both of these games, which is essentially what's required here, I think, for the Cowboys to get into the divisional, win the division. And so it's not like the Cowboys are really looking backwards behind them necessarily at anybody here, right? Like, it's pretty much a locked into the 5 seed situation. Meanwhile, like Detroit, me at this time in the season, man, I like getting a little loose with the old ESPN playoff machine. I'm popping stuff in. I got a lot of futures and, different things that I'm like, all right, what are the chances this team can make the playoffs and this team can win the division? And like, what are the permutations for the Bills and the Dolphins, et cetera, et cetera. As I sort of stumble around, kind of playing around with all this stuff, you realize that there's like a reasonable chance with the loss by the 49ers on Monday night that the Lions could get the bye still all of a sudden, right? And like, again, whether it's likely or not, this is a Lions team that, think about the coaching, right? Like, who's more likely, even if there's sort of a latent need, quote unquote, for this game, who's more likely to have their team more interested in this game? Your man's Mike McCarthy or Dan Campbell?
We definitely know who it's not.
Yeah. And so, like, I get the idea of, like, the Cowboys are at home, and, of course, everybody's going nuts about the Cowboys' home road splits, as if everybody's road splits just aren't, essentially the exact same. And this is a Cowboys team that on the road has beaten teams by, like, 40 points. They just happen to be the bad teams. They just happen to lose to the good teams. And in the case of their trip to Philadelphia and last week against Miami, like, we're talking about last-second type losses, right? Stuff that is absolutely excusable. But on the flip side, a lot of the home games have been up against garbage teams too. And I'm not including them in the garbage pile necessarily, but the Eagles, who were mega struggling, who frankly still are mega struggling at this point. And then at this point in the season, I still just kind of feel meh about the Eagles. And, I think about the Cowboys game against the Seahawks. Like, I think Seahawks, and obviously not necessarily as good as the Lions, but a pretty comparable team as far as like what they're good at versus what, the Lions are good at. I mean, that game came down right to it, to the point where obviously the Seahawks covered a big number. I think the Lions can win this game outright because I look at the Cowboys as having had another chance last week, sort of 2 chances in a row to kind of show us that this is a different group. Mm-hmm. And you can bet on them at big prices like I did. Dak Prescott 25-1 to win the MVP, and he ends up the favorite halfway or 3/4 of the way through the season. It's like, yeah, like that was the whole point of that bet. It wasn't that like, oh, I'm convinced that Dallas is like this, a different entity this season. It's just that they're priced. Essentially, they were being priced like they were way behind the Eagles. And I think at this point, those teams are just kind of pretty much equal. And neither of them, may necessarily be sort of Super Bowl contenders this year, but that's the point of the bet. And so when we go and we say, okay, Dallas, now show it to me. Now that the prices have equaled out and Dak was a favorite and all that kind of thing, show me what you've got when it comes to Buffalo and going to Miami. And like the Buffalo one was a full-blown fail. The Miami one was a fail, at least early on, when you're working the fullback on the first drive, like 3-4 carries and by the goal line. It's just like, what are you doing? And Tony Pollard, like, quick rant here, right? But like the fantasy football junkies out there last year, right, are like, oh man, Tony Pollard, like get Zeke out of here. Tony Pollard's so good. Like he needs to get all the carries, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, no, that's not what Tony Pollard is, right? Tony Pollard is get that man 5 to 10 carries, but have somebody else who can do the heavy lifting. If Ezekiel Elliott was on the Cowboys, they win that game last week against the Dolphins. Now, I realize why he couldn't be, obviously salary cap issues and changing all of that stuff. But like that, Zeke Elliott is a playoff football type of a guy. He's the guy who gets you in the end zone. He doesn't, everybody does the screenshot of like, how does Tony Pollard not get this ball into the end zone? And like, to a point, it's true. But he just doesn't have the physicality that, most other tailbacks do, right? He's an explosive guy, but you don't want him carrying the ball 20 times. And that's why Rico Dowdle is getting so many carries, right? And it's like Rico Dowdle isn't any good either, right? But again, like that's the sacrifice that they had to make from a financial standpoint to make everybody else, every other position sort of better, right? They had to take that money that they were paying Zeke and go elsewhere with it. So I completely understand all of that. But the point is like, after those sort of failures, right, this isn't a situation where like it's bounce back time. I think this is resigned to the fact that we're going to Tampa Bay for the second straight year. And like, I don't know what the line's going to be in that game, right? I imagine the Cowboys are going to be favored probably by more than a field goal, but we'll address that when we get to it. Just in the meantime here, I think the Lions are going to biting kneecaps. Dan here is going to have the Lions still fired up because they think that they might be able to still get a bye here and playing this game before some of their other competition for that, 49ers, Eagles, etc. Like, I think that's really good for the Lions here who get, I think they thrive on the chance to like take down a team and be the underdog. Whereas the Cowboys here who have kind of, boosted their resume on beating up favorite, as a favorite at home, I think the number is just too high. Now, I'm looking around and it's actually, started to drop here a little bit. I'm seeing some 5.5s pretty widely available here. So if you're interested in Dallas at -5.5 or Dallas, period, -5.5 would be the thing that you'd want to get, obviously over 6. But for me, I bet this at, there was some +6.5 early on in the week. And I was just like, honestly, a lot like Baltimore, San Francisco last week, where I looked at it and I was like, this can't go higher than 6.5. And then, that game touched 6.5 a fair amount last week. And so, you could get that pretty frequently throughout the week, which I, thought was crazy. And guess what? Turned out to be a little crazy since Baltimore won that game, going away. Yeah, I think Dallas very vulnerable here on Saturday night here, still kind of licking their wounds. I think it's more of a licking their wounds and kind of getting ready for the playoffs thing for Dallas. And I think Detroit's still ready to fight and bite your kneecaps and kick you in the teeth.
Yeah, this is an interesting one for sure. And it's funny because I'm flip-flopping here. And I'm flip-flopping, as I said, started on Detroit, went to Dallas. Now I'm back on Detroit. Detroit +6. And I mean, if we continue this conversation for another 5 minutes on this game, there might be time for me to switch back. But no, not going to do that. We're going to just move on. And I'm going to go with Detroit +6 in this one. A lot of points, a lot of points. You'll notice a theme at some point soon where I take a lot of points. But we move on to the Dolphins and the Ravens. A big boy matchup, dare I say, here on the Clutch Picks Sports Betting Podcast. Ravens at home, favored by 3.5 points. You just mentioned the Ravens' massive performance against the San Francisco 49ers on Monday Night Football, where, dare I say, the Ravens bullied the Niners. The bullies got bullied. And I look at this game, and the Ravens are the type of team that Miami is not ready for. This is a weight class game to me. When I look at how Miami matches up against the Ravens, I think the Ravens will just be more physical than Miami is, who is a more finesse team. Every game, it seems like, and I have Mostert in fantasy as well. He starts off well and ends up limping off to the sidelines. Like, that's not how you want to play against the Baltimore Ravens. Either way, Ravens laying 3.5 points. I don't like, as you people listen to the pod know, don't like laying the extra half point here for 3.5, but I just think the Ravens are better. I think they're more physical, they're tougher. And yeah, the Dolphins, this will end. This is to solidify the number 1 seed. Go Ravens here, -3.5.
So I have that number around, I have this around -3.25. So there was 4 earlier on in the week, so I grabbed +4 with the Dolphins, right?
Mm-hmm.
Similar kind of thing where it's like you have a massive game, short week, turnaround, et cetera, et cetera. There's some threes that have kind of become available here, and I kind of go like, yeah, Baltimore -3 looks like a pretty good option too, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, for me, I think I just kind of rather go into this game like taking as many points as I can get. I've got the 4. That's just kind of how I'm going to go with it, right? Because again, you're trying to predict how these teams, both having won pretty significant games, how they're both going to play the following week, right? And obviously, when you're kind of doing that, it's like, well, let's try to come up with, some sort of like wider handicap. I mean, obviously, Jalen Waddle potentially not being in for the Dolphins could be a problem, but as you know, in a lot of ways, like unless it's Tyreek, all these guys are kind of interchangeable, right? Like they all put up, like Raheem Mostert leading the league in touchdowns. It's like, yeah, somebody else could do that. He just happens to be the guy who, is sort of allowed to do that this year when it comes to the Dolphins. So I just kind of go like, yeah, if I kind of think there's, 2 different ways both teams can go here, I just kind of want the points. And that's why I grabbed the +4 as quickly as I possibly could.
Nah, totally get it. Totally understand. It will be a great game and a great game to watch in terms of teams that could make runs here come playoff time. Speaking of said playoff time here, we got 2 teams that are battling for the division. Saints at the BUCS. BUCS at home, favored by 2.5 points. Baker has these boys rolling, and this team, they're at home. I just have to lean on the BUCS here. I don't really like it because I'm being facetious when I talk positively about anyone in this division, but Derek Carr and company, the only thing that has me pausing here is the fact that the Saints played last Thursday, which seems like such a long time ago. Just because of the holidays, because there's so much football, because there's football on all these different days. That would be the only thing that has me pausing here. But then I remember it's Derek Carr. Then I remember it's the Saints and whatever. Yeah. Give me the BUCS at less than a field goal here in a game that if the BUCS win, that solidifies the division, right? I mean, this is the Saints' last chance. So
yeah, and even then, right, like they need a ton of help and a bunch of just craziness. And yeah, it looks like Tampa Bay is going to, which is great because 8-1 before the season for the Buccaneers to win this division. And it's playing out almost exactly the way that we thought it was going to. It's just like all these teams are going to stink, and it's going to come down to like 1 or 2 games. And honestly, I didn't even think we'd be in such a good position for the Buccaneers as we are now. It was more just like, oh yeah, week 17, BUCS at home to the Saints. What if both of these teams are like 7-7, or I guess wouldn't be 7-8 or 8-7, something along those lines. Turns out the Buccaneers are just kind of better than we kind of ever thought they were going to be. And to me, the Saints are kind of, I don't know if they're worse, but they're certainly as bad as I thought they were going to be. They're probably worse than what the market thought they were going to be. And so the way that the Saints have been priced all the way up until this point, and the way the Buccaneers, frankly, have been priced, means that this point spread being under 3 like makes a lot of sense. So when this opened at 3, I can sort of see the idea of like, well, if I'm getting, +3 with the Saints, in this game, let's take it, because our project, numbers people would project this at like 1.5, 2, even maybe 2.5. That being said, like, I'm higher on the BUCS, always have been. I am lower on the Saints, always have been, right? And nothing in the last month, which is only kind of the sample size that we can really draw from based on how the NFL has been, where things change so rapidly. It's like, I was happy to get the BUCS at -3. I was like, well, I definitely, oh man, I really hope it doesn't go to 3.5, because my number for this game is 3.5, with that sort of increased consideration for the Buccaneers and that downgrading that I've been doing for the Saints. And so, yeah, -2.5, absolutely. So the good news is I can understand why the number, why the line came off of 3, because of the way these teams have been rated. I just don't agree with that rating, and especially going forward with how well the Buccaneers are playing, and honestly how kind of meh the Saints have been playing, which like has been kind of their whole season, right? The Saints season, they are meh across the board.
You're not wrong. You're definitely not wrong. And like that game last week against the Rams was such a classic. You're getting beat down and then the game's over and now you're going to get some points. Just luckily, I hope a bunch of people were on the over last week, because you welcomed those garbage touchdowns from Derek Carr. Anyway, story for another day as we keep it moving here to the Steelers, who are taking on the Seahawks. Seahawks at home, favored by 3.5 points. This is a classic here where, we saw Mike Tomlin do what Mike Tomlin does in the rah-rah, get the team fired up for a game that, they just need to win. They need to have. And then Mason Rudolph out of nowhere. All right, cool.
Yeah.
You got Pickens
or not Mitch Trubisky, right?
Also
Mason
true,
Rudolph,
right?
or anybody other than Mitch Trubisky. Yeah.
Also true. Now we head into a game in Seattle. The ask is tougher here in terms of going into Seattle. Tough place to play, but you're getting 3.5 points. And I like the 3.5 points here, especially the extra half point here. But I do kind of worry about just, buying into, like, I feel like last week was such a good job of like leapfrogging on and off what Steelers team we're getting here. And so is this the time to hop off? You know what I mean? Because this is not the game that Mike Tomlin needs,
No, they need everything that they can get, right? But that was the case back when they lost to Arizona and New England. You know what I mean? Like, so of course, it's not the home game, in prime time, their quote unquote Super Bowl, right? Even if obviously they're hoping to be in the playoffs, and NFL players think that if you're in the playoffs, you can make it to the Super Bowl, right? For me, this is going to be a card that I play a couple of different times here, especially as we get close, that I have played already a couple of times, but it's going to become more prevalent as we get closer to the end of the season. And I'm here to tell you, for week 18, I'm going to be doing it a lot. It's more of a futures thing for me. This is, I have Seattle to make the playoffs, and they need to win. They need to win games where they are favored at home against inferior opponents. So it's like, I don't really need to bet this game because I already have, what is essentially kind of a 50-50 remaining interest here in the Seahawks to like I said, win this game and make the playoffs. So that's just the way that I'm going to be looking at this game. Now, from a numbers perspective, like moving the Steelers down the way that the market did would suggest that this line should be like 4, but we saw it, right? Mitch Trubisky is the problem. Listen, there's a lot of problems with the Steelers before Mitch Trubisky got in there, but like losing to the teams that they were losing to, the difference was that Mitch Trubisky was involved, right? Because obviously Kenny Pickett got hurt in the middle of that game against Arizona. So it's, I am going to blame Mitch Trubisky. By the way, it's not like we haven't seen Mitch Trubisky before. We've seen him a lot. So, the problem is here in Mason Rudolph going on the road, right, where it becomes a louder environment and for him to have to work into. Are you going to get the George Pickens game, right, where it's slant to the house from 75 yards out?
Great way to start.
Seems really great way to start. Really seems unlikely. And are the Seahawks going to be able to take advantage of a thin Steelers secondary the way that the Bengals couldn't. Like, I think they will, right? Like, Geno Smith is flat out a better quarterback than Browning. Speaking of sniffing sort of Mike Tomlin, we also sniffed out the sell high scenario. I couldn't believe that line after we talked. We talk on Thursday morning this week. But like that line going the other direction from Cincinnati -2 to Cincinnati -3 in that game was just like, what is like where do we get those numbers? Like where do we find that point spread? Like how
it wasn't even like Jamar Chase is back either, right? It wasn't even that. Not that should move the line, but it wasn't even like no, but that's what I'm saying. It wasn't like, hey, Jamar Chase is back. Now the line's even more in favor of the Bengals, It wasn't even that. It was just weird.
It was like, who is like everybody who's into it as much as we are, and the people who are listening to this podcast are, like, we watched Minnesota Cincinnati. I mean, you mentioned that we sniffed out the Mike Tomlin spot type situation, right? We sniffed out Jake Browning not being any good is essentially what we did, because that line being -3 was patently ridiculous. And so you were watching that game, and everybody's watching that game, I imagine, the maniacs like us. And Jake Browning's throwing balls up to the Vikings cornerbacks, and they can't do anything with it. And then he does it again early on in the first quarter, and I can't get the tweet out fast enough about, like, this guy is on borrowed time with some of these throws. And then sure enough, right, like before I can even finish the tweet, he throws the interception in the end zone, against Pittsburgh. And so you're not facing Jake Browning this time. You're facing Geno Smith at home. Now, Geno Smith, as we know, not necessarily in love with Geno by any stretch of the imagination, right? But with a full cast of characters there, the Seattle offense can take advantage of the Steelers and, what is right now like a really, really thin secondary, to the point where Patrick Peterson is playing safety and getting those interceptions of Jake Browning. So, listen, I feel really good about my position on the Seahawks, to make the playoffs and sort of, them getting the win that they need to sort of help that out. If I absolutely had to bet it, my lean would be to the Seahawks minus the 3.5, even though, again, like, Steelers are theoretically dangerous as underdogs right up until the point where, like, they can't move the ball and they can't stop anybody either. And, the home team wins this game comfortably.
It's so funny. You mentioned the Patrick Peterson play. And when that happened, I was like, hold on, is that like the Patrick Peterson? Like, he's still in the league.
Safety edition.
Right. Yeah. I was like, what's happening here? But this will be a tough game for sure. Interesting to watch. And good. I do wish you well on your futures bet here for the Seahawks, regardless of whatever my pick is in this game. We continue on, though, to the Bengals at the Chiefs. And whoa. I mean, what can we say about the Chiefs and that Christmas Day performance for sure? Speaking of a letdown, I know that the Chiefs are bad, right? Like, they are not, and bad relative to the Chiefs, not relative to the rest of the NFL, right?
Yeah, bad version.
Bad version of the Chiefs. Thank you. That's why you do what you do. We're coming into this game, Chiefs laying 7 points, not a position I want to be in, but you just mentioned, and the games weren't ordered in this way specifically, but you're just talking about Jake Browning and the Bengals. Yeah. And the reminder of what happened in that Chiefs Raiders game, that Raiders front line was just relentless. And even with that said, Mahomes and company, we don't really see them give away 14 points like that. It's not like it was anything that was done by Mr. Aiden O'Connell or the offense. And so I kind of look at the Bengals and wonder what kind of offense they'd be able to muster up. While the Chiefs, there has to be some progression on offense. I'm not asking for much. I don't know. I see you shaking your head. Well, and I'm not asking for much. I'm not asking for much at all, right? I'm just asking for, like, simple basics. Help your man's Patrick Mahomes out a little bit. Kelsey throwing the helmet. Like, Pacheco's back, and then he's almost getting concussed as his helmet flies off, and he's still getting hit. I'm like, what's going on here?
Strap it up, man. Like, tighten up the strap. Like, what are you doing?
It's so crazy. You know which side I'm going to be on. I feel like I know what side you're going to be on. But I'm on the Chiefs -7 here. Not liking it, but it's also 7, so I'd live with the push here.
Sure. I was going to say, can you tell me what side I'm going to be on? Because I don't know at this point in time, right? For the reasons that I just sort of mentioned. And obviously, like, just my general feeling about the Chiefs and the idea that, like, just because it's supposed to happen doesn't mean that it is going to. And I've referenced it a couple of different times, right? Like, ask anybody who had Travis Kelce in fantasy football this year, like how well that's gone, right? And if like he's the guy who's everybody is relying on to like finally figure it out there, that's a little bit dicey. And we'll see next year, or maybe later on this season, maybe it's even this Sunday. But like, things fall off pretty quick in the NFL.
Yeah.
Right? Like Dalvin Cook goes from like 1,400 yards to like not on a team. Mm-hmm. And everybody kind of goes like, what? How? And it's like, because even the best players in the league fall off, and they fall off quick. Now, Travis Kelce as a tight end, you've seen it with like, all the other great tight ends, right? Tony Gonzalez, Antonio Gates, right? They can still be effective in the league. They will stay on a team. This isn't a scenario where, we have 1,000 capable running backs, like from a physical perspective, that we can just slot in here. He's going to be on the team for a very long time. But like the Travis Kelce that we know doesn't look good, man. Does not look good, because like this stuff would have happened by now, right? This fix would have happened by now. But if you're going to find a team to sort of have even a temporary fix, the Cincinnati Bengals' brutal defense, basically in the bottom like 2 or 3 of rush defense and pass defense in the league, like would be that team. And Jake Browning throwing the ball up like a maniac would be that dude that your defense would be able to shut down. And like, as much as they lose to the Raiders, and they're all rattled because it's embarrassing, and this, that, or whatever, it's like, they did literally score 2 touchdowns in the time that I took a very brief nap on Christmas Day.
It was weird.
Well, it was super weird if you had fallen asleep for 10 minutes and you woke up on the under, hoping like no one would score ever. And you woke up and you said to your wife, who was sitting next to you watching the game, like, what? What just happened with 2 touchdowns? She's like, yeah, 10 seconds apart. I'm like, okay. Now, luckily, a Christmas miracle, the understayed under, despite the 2 defensive touchdowns. But it's like, obviously, Aidan O'Connell, much has was reported, right, or talked about on the broadcast, like he didn't need to throw the football. He threw it a few times. He just didn't complete any passes. He didn't need to complete any passes to win that game. Like, Jake Browning's probably going to need to complete some passes here, right? Unless, again, the Chiefs get super loose. So, at 7, because, there was some 7.5s. At 7, like I would probably go with the Chiefs as well here. The other sort of element, again, and this does not really have anything to do with necessarily Cincinnati's motivation, because they're going to try to win this game. But Cincinnati can lose this game and still make the playoffs, like relatively simply. Like it doesn't get like crazy upset type time for them to kind of squeak their way into the playoffs still. With a couple of different things that happen here that I think are pretty reasonable down the stretch. So, as weird as it is to say, and I'm sure they don't believe this necessarily, but it's actually not really that much of a must-win game. They would love to have it, Cincinnati would, but I just don't think that they're going to get it here with this Kansas City team that every time they sort of embarrass themselves, quote unquote, they have had some pretty decent bounce back efforts as far as efficiency, et cetera, et cetera. So obviously need to know whether Jamar Chase is going to play in this game as well. That's relatively important. I think that would toggle this line from 7.5 down to 7. And, the idea that he is going to play is probably why it's down to 7. But if he doesn't, you're probably looking at a 7.5. But yeah, I'm not going to talk you out of the Chiefs here, but I'm certainly not. I'm not betting it. I talk about my chip as far as I'm going to play the card of futures, and that sort of thing. This I'm just going to play the card week 18, and I honestly there's so many games, especially at 1:00 on Sunday. I can go without not watching this game because I don't think I'm going to learn anything about either team.
It's so strange. Such a strange week for sure. Jamar Chase also on my fantasy team, so I do kind of hope that he plays. Fantasy football finals. Okay, if there's ever a week I'm going to slide in fantasy football as much as possible, it's going to be this week, okay? Chiefs -7 in this one. We move on to the Falcons at the Bears, and I'm going to be very honest here. I need a little bit of an explanation because I don't really understand this line. Bears at home, favored by 3. And it's just, I have trouble with the Bears favored against anyone. But then I looked up and I realized, wait, the Bears have won more games this season than I was paying attention to, right?
Yeah.
I think they're 1 game behind the Falcons here. So it's just like, oh, okay, maybe I do get this line. But with that said, I'm taking the points in the Falcons.
Yeah.
I feel like the Falcons finally decided, we're going to run like our actual offense now at the end of the season and get our best players the ball and like not play Ritter.
Yeah. And listen, man, this Bears win total of 7.5 is getting a little dangerous at this point as far as going over.
Mm-hmm.
This was Lock City there for
like, when did this happen?
Yeah. I just wake up and there it goes. They got 3 touchdowns like pretty sort of sequentially, pretty quickly. Certainly not Raiders quick, but against the Cardinals, and then the Cardinals kind of like almost could have maybe came back, but didn't in that game. And so the Bears just covered a very similar situation, right, against, I guess, a worse team than the Falcons. But again, cool on your home win against the Colts. But like, is anybody really buying into the Falcons, especially dome Southern team traveling here up north, to Chicago, right? And again, it doesn't have to snow or be some sort of crazy deal here, but it's like, this isn't the indoor track scenario that we get the Falcons when they get, they play the Saints, or honestly, you're getting the Falcons potentially in the same conditions that you had when they literally lost to Carolina 2 weeks ago, right? And by the way, the Bears defense is like as good, if not better, than Carolina's. And honestly, their offense right now, with the way Justin Fields is actually able to run the ball, crazy thought. Let's have Justin Fields run the football as part of our offense, which is not something that they did for the first half of the season. Somebody needs to get fired just on that premise alone. So I get it. It's very similar, or somewhat similar, to the Saints Tampa Bay game, where, you do look at it. And I think a lot of people potentially look at that and go like, well, this number's too high. But the reality is the Bears rating is as high as it's been all season. They are being rated like an 8-win team. And damn it, they might end up winning 8 games. And I do not want that to happen. Luckily, or sort of maybe luckily, we'll see how it all shakes down. But they finish the season at Lambeau Field next week. And that, I can't imagine that game not mattering to the Packers. Obviously things being what they are this week. The Packers have a big game this week, but even in a loss, I think they still, have a chance to make the playoffs. So I'm fine with the Bears winning this game from a futures standpoint, and I would take them -3 in this game against the Falcons. But I will be, on the sidelines next week, probably hoping that the Packers just beat the Bears for a couple of different reasons. So, that's how little I think of the Falcons here, who have proven me right, at least maybe not in individual games every single week, but over the course of the season, allowing, if you will, the Buccaneers to cash, or pretty darn close to cash here, an absurdly high division championship ticket.
Yeah, the whole weather aspect, having to travel, not being indoors, it's a very important factor here in this game. And that's the biggest reason I am switching said pick to the Bears, who, as you mentioned, are more well-versed to just, hey, let Justin Fields do what Justin Fields does here, as opposed to the Falcons, who still have no idea what they're really doing, if we're being honest.
It's got like 3 interceptions for Taylor Heineke written all over it. Just Jalen Johnson, just, scampering around the field after intercepting Taylor Heineke multiple times.
Yeah. Pick has been switched. Give me the Bears -3 as we keep it going to the Titans at the Texans. Texans at home, favored by 5. I feel like these teams just played, 2 weeks ago? Texas won that game by 3, but that was on the road. Now we're going home. Do I have that correctly?
You do.
I think so. Something
You're
like
on
that.
it, buddy.
I don't remember what the spread was in that game, but
I don't think we remembered it at the time either. I think that was the one where it was like, who's favored by 2.5?
Oh, yes. Yeah. This one here, Tennessee by 5. I'm going to take the points here. I know Stroud was limited in practice. We still don't know if he's playing, but I'm assuming this is a Stroud line. That would be my guess.
We're on the way there, I would say.
Yeah. Okay, that's fair. I still think, though, the 5 points is a lot for these two teams that will play a close game or are more prone to play a close game. I just like the points.
Yeah, I think you're right here, but I think there's obviously a strategy that has to kind of come into this, right? And it's waiting to find out whether it is CJ Stroud or not, but not for the way that you might think, right? A lot of people be like, well, let's wait and see if CJ Stroud plays, and then we'll bet on the Texans. And no, It's to me, it's the other way around, right?
Yeah.
Because, and this is why we, put ratings together and figure out where a team is. We do it for a lot of different reasons, but one of the reasons is what happens when the quarterback misses 3 games, and we have to readjust once that quarterback comes back, right? And so this number, what did it open at? This opened like 3.5. Yeah, this opened 3.5. And that was very much an in-between number, right? Because all we've seen out of Case Keenum and, theoretically Davis Mills, not necessarily this season, because he actually played okay when he came into that game last week, is that there's a pretty significant downgrade to Houston when CJ Stroud isn't there. Problem is, there's also been some injury issues outside of CJ Stroud. Mm-hmm. We mentioned Will Anderson on the defense. We talked about in the past the left guard, I believe it is, for the Texans, and then of course like a handful of receivers that seems to be a carousel of injured Texans receivers kind of coming in and out of the lineup here. So we can't go all the way back to where the Texans were when CJ Stroud got hurt, because when he got hurt before that Jets game, right? Think about it. They were favored by 4, something like that, on the road in New York. That rating for the Texans was pretty high. It was actually like higher than our preseason ceiling, right? We talk every week about how like the Texans are just pushing through the top end of their rating, and like, is it deserved? Is it deserved? I don't know I don't think you can go right back to that rating because of all the guys that we mentioned that are hurt. And like, again, who knows what kind of like after effects there are, even if he does get through, this final stages of concussion protocol when it comes to Stroud. That line, if we were back to where we were a month ago, would be like 6. The other element is like Tennessee with Ryan Tannehill. Like, it's never going to be particularly pretty or exciting. It could be functional. And so whether it's like Will Levis or Tannehill, right? Like, I think the Texans, the Titans, as we saw last week, putting up a hell of a fight at home against Seattle, and now having this, road divisional game, spoiler type situation as an underdog. Yeah, like this is kind of the prime, Mike Vrabel type situation here, right? So, I mean, I would love it if this line, when they announce that Stroud plays, if this line goes to 6. Like, Can you imagine? Like, how great would that be? I think that's an amazing bet. So that's kind of what I'm sort of sitting around hoping for. More realistically, I think this 5 is kind of, it's obviously at the very least, like, it's not like Stroud's not going to get announced in. They're going to be like, it's not going to drop, right? It's not going to go to 4.5. I shouldn't say that. It could, but it would be because people were like waiting for it to go to 6. It didn't. And then people like you and I just bet +5. Because we're like, I guess it's not going to 6. I'll take 5. And then it ends up closing 4.5, maybe 4, maybe even lower than that, right? The point is like, we're going to want to get the key number of 3. We would like to get the, a semi-key number of 4 here. So sort of 4.5 is the goal, whereas +6 is the dream here. But either way, this is definitely Titans, no matter what.
Yeah, no, definitely with you there on the Titans of Tennessee and Mr. Vrabel for sure. Speaking of 5-point lines, we got another 5-point line, even though it's 5.5, with the Rams here, who are at the Giants, and the Linsanity Tommy DeVito era has appeared to come to an end as Tyrod Taylor. I didn't even realize that Tyrod Taylor was, still a thing. Like, I didn't realize, like, I just thought that time was over. Well, but what a ride it's been for the New York Giants at the quarterback position this season. And here they are as 5.5-point dogs at home. I just like the Rams. I've been riding the Rams for a long time this season. And I can't lie, as a Niners fan, I've kind of done the pause and peek behind, kind of like, hold up here. Should be worried about that last game of the season against the Rams. Like, right? Is this gonna matter? Is this gonna like mean anything? Like, what happens if we play the Rams? Because I know people are talking Peter Schrager saying that, the Rams played better against the Ravens than the Niners did. And I don't, that's one of the dumbest things ever. Then you remember, he's boys with Sean McVay. Oh, okay. That's why he's out here doing that.
I don't.
Anyways, sorry. That ends my TED talk. Back to this game, though. Despite all of that, I do like the Rams in this game at -5.5, even though I am prone mostly sometimes to be on the Tyrod Taylor wave because he does stuff. Might not always be positive stuff, but he does stuff. But give me the Rams here.
I got to tell you, I am such an idiot. So that game, obviously, if Eagles and Giants being on Christmas Day, it's like, okay, I got to write about this game. I got to, don't have to have a bet necessarily, but it's like, I know the Eagles are going to blow out Tommy DeVito. Mm-hmm. I know that, right? Like they are going to blow out Tommy DeVito, and they're going to blow out the Tommy DeVito. They're going to blow out the Giants, because that's all they did last year. Essentially, was blow out the Giants and they didn't even need to in the last game, and they were, they were up like 2 touchdowns in the last game of the season, and it would have been so obvious and so easy to just be like, let's just take the Eagles in the first half. Because I cited the stats of the 3 games last year where they literally were like 80-15 or something like that, right, in the first half against the Giants. And it's not like it didn't occur to me that Tyrod Taylor could come into the game. It absolutely did. Like I was literally going, the only thing that beats me here is if Tyrod Taylor comes in and just vibes his face off in the second half of this game against this garbage Eagles secondary. Because the whole point was that Tommy DeVito can't take advantage of the garbage Eagles secondary. Yeah. And yet I still go full game with the Eagles. And they're up 20-3 in the first half. And it's like, good. And we're doing it. And it's just like, well, of course Tyrod Taylor's coming in the second half. And of course, this is going to fall apart when it's just like, sometimes it's so obvious, you just completely miss it. And it's like, how about you cite more first half stats and then not bet the first half, Russell? Like, come on, man. All that is to say is that, like, it's funny the way this line is moved, right? So it was like 6.5, 6, and then Taylor gets announced in and the line drops like 4. Ooh. And then everybody sort of stops and goes like, it's still Tyrod Taylor. like easy. Easy out there, right? And so now that this line has moved from 4 to 5.5, and it's, like, we try not to get the like worst of the number, and so, but the point is like 4 to 5.5 really isn't that much of a big discrepancy. So you're still welcome to bet the Rams here at -5.5. So I got a little bit, and certainly not necessarily a best bet yet at this point. I have to dig in a little bit more to see if I want to make that kind of like a higher end wager here. But yeah, man, I think the Rams are really good. We've talked about it, right? Like getting the Rams, speaking of ratings, and why do we do ratings? Well, we can compare it not just to this season, not just to 5 games ago with the Houston Texans, but to last year. And we had to go back a ways to get back to, Matthew Stafford healthy, Cooper Kupp healthy type of, scenario here. But like, they are now kind of rated about where they were, before those guys got hurt last year. Mm-hmm. And whether it's, obviously Puka Nacua, Demarcus Robinson, Kyron Williams, right? Like the running game, just in general, being way, way better than it was last year. The Rams are way better than they were last year before all of those guys got hurt, and they all started to kind of fall apart for the Rams, right? And so if like we had known this going into the season, we would have absolutely made hay on some over Rams win totals, et cetera, et cetera. But Puka Nacua comes out of, relative obscurity, at least from like a drafting perspective. And, and Kyron Williams, who had opportunity last year, didn't necessarily do all that much with it. He ends up being like, arguably a top 5 running back. I don't even know if it's all that arguable at this point. I think he just is a top 5 running back in the league right now. And so, I think there might still be some stigma to the Rams based on the idea that like, well, there's only so far we can push the Rams based on where we thought they were at the start of the season, right? So we talk about range, like, oh yeah, the Rams this year, like they were 3rd last from a win total standpoint. Think about that, man.
I was going to ask you actually, if Sean McVay's name wasn't Sean McVay, would he be getting coach of the year?
He should be anyway.
You know what I mean?
He should be. His odds are certainly not reflective of, I think, the chances that he has to win the award. I am not I think the D'Amico Ryans, Shane Steichen scene is toast. The Dan Campbell thing has never made sense to me. So it's literally like, are we just going to give it to Stefanski? And honestly, it's really hard for me to make an argument against that. So it's, to me, I think it's kind of a deal where it's like, I think it's a 2-man race. It's a lot like the MVP for me right now, where it's one guy is like is a pretty significant favorite and the other guy is a massive underdog.
Sorry, I know I interrupted there, but it's just like
no. But we'll see that game that you're talking about, that Rams 49ers game. right? Like it depends on sort of where these games get scheduled too, right? Because obviously there's still a Sunday night game that needs to get scheduled for next week. There's Saturday games that need to get scheduled for next week, right? And so what happens this week shakes down what games matter, what order we have to play these games in, what games we can move to Saturday, what game we want. And I think Sunday night game is pretty much prime for a Buffalo Miami, but that's neither here nor there as we talk about. I don't even remember what game we're talking about. Oh yeah, the Rams,
Rams, Giants.
But my point is, right, is that if we come into the season, the range is 30 to 50 because we think the way that we thought about the Rams. When in reality, their range was probably closer to last year's range, which was like 45 to 65, right? Playoff contender, division contender, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like the fact that we've been slow, the market has been slow to drag them out to an above average team is really the market's fault for not recognizing that the priors to this season are irrelevant. And it should be based off of essentially last season, which I know like feels like it was a million years ago, but that's the same, if not better, personnel that they have this season, having added some of these guys to the team, right? Like the problem last year was that they weren't deep enough because they sold everything, that wasn't nailed down to get veterans for the Super Bowl run, which obviously worked out. But it's like, yeah, we need to like have a couple of years or a year on off season to find some diamonds in the rough, some of those late round picks. And it's like getting Puka Nacua in the 4th round or 5th round, like that qualifies, man. Like he's playing better than most first rounders. So like, yeah, you got him that late, but like you essentially got a 1st round pick. He's the 2nd choice, for rookie of the year, right? If you redid the draft, then my guy is probably going in the top 10 to 15. So they end up getting a 1st round pick that they didn't have because of obviously all the selling that they've been doing. So, the Rams from 2 years ago, are they -5.5 against Tyrod Taylor and this Giants team? I don't think so. I think they're a lot higher than that, right? So I think at this point, the Rams on the road here against this Giants team that, they've had their little bump at the end there with the story and this, that, or whatever. It's playing out the string type deal here for the Giants.
Yeah. And part of that was, you mentioned before, as we switch gears here from going from the Rams beating the Giants to the team that beat the Giants last week, being the Philadelphia Eagles, who now find themselves at home as 10.5-point favorites against the Cardinals. I'm on the Cards here plus 10.5 points, and it's more so based on the Eagles. I thought the bounce back was coming last week, right? Where they just take care of business against the Giants, as we just discussed. And maybe I'm a week late, or I was a week early.
I think we were a half early and a half late or something. I don't know.
Something like that. You know what I'm trying to say?
We're half short. I'll tell you that. We were definitely half short.
This week, now they're laying double digits against the Cards. And should they be able to blow out the Cards by double digits? Yeah. But I don't know if I can lay 10.5 points with the Eagles at this point, because I can't remember the last time I saw the Eagles and thought that they were anywhere close to the team that we saw last year, or a team that I should be just willy-nilly, laying double digits with you.
Yeah, and the fact that like an explosive pass play is like around the corner at any given time, right? Very concerning if you're an Eagles fan. And so, I expected a little bit more from Kyler Murray last week, from like a stay in the game, like backdoor it. And they had the ball down 8 where it's like, I don't even need the 2-point conversion, man. Just get the ball in the end zone. And they couldn't do it against the Bears. But like the sad reality for the Eagles right now is that the Bears defense is better than the Eagles defense. Right? Which ipso facto means that like Kyler Murray has a better chance of backdooring this game, especially at 10.5 points instead of 4.5 points last week. And if Tyrod Taylor can do it and the Giants can do it, then like, honestly, sad as that is for maybe the Giants, or maybe it's sad for the Cardinals, who knows at this point, like the Cardinals can too, right? It's just like, if you need to bet on this game so badly, then like, I think the Cardinals have to be the side, because it's like, why are we laying big numbers with the Eagles, who again, I hate to say this sort of every week or every second week, right? But like the reputation of the Eagles has been built off of last season's regular season, where they played virtually no one. Now they are playing teams, they are winning some and they are losing some, right? So like they were never the 10-1 team, they were never the 15-2 or 14-3 or whatever it was last season type of a team. They have always just kind of been the 11-win team. Right? And I still think that's kind of generous, honestly, like potentially. And listen, they can get hot, right? Like they get hot. Any team get in the tournament, right? Especially with a couple of home games potentially in the playoffs, and like they might be fine. This isn't saying like there's no way they can win the Super Bowl necessarily, right? But it's more just like, what about this defense makes you want to lay a significant amount of points with the Eagles against Kyler Murray? Like, you know, Tommy DeVito, sure, right? Like, not really an NFL quarterback, if you know, being honest, right? Like, was not a top tier college quarterback, right? So it's just like Kyler Murray, first round, you know, first overall pick, like $200 million guy or whatever, right? Like, and yeah, he's been disappointing, and you know, for most of his entire career, especially relative to that money, like he can still get it done, especially when the question is, can you just get it inside a 10.5 points? There's even some 11s right now. Yeah, not my favorite, but yeah, like I think that's the play that you got to make if you're dying to bet this game.
Yeah, no, totally with you there and that one. And we move on. We're still talking big spreads here as we move on to the Buffalo Bills, who are at home and favored by 13 points against the New England Patriots. And Bill Belichick, I mean, if he's about to leave New England and just end up screwing their draft pick on the way out, I think that's just amazing. Even if the storyline is just adding to the allure of the Belichick mystique, I'm here for all of that, right? He's earned that. But this is a lot of points here for me with the Buffalo Bills. And I know that at some point, you know, the Bills obviously are doing work, what they've been able to do the last few weeks. And the coach, the head coach bump, or the new coach bump, pardon me, didn't equal a win last week for the Chargers, but it earned them a cover, which, hey, more power to you, Chargers. 13 points is just a lot. I'm always going to start on taking the points with the double-digit points, so I need to be talked out of it.
This game's interesting for I mean, obviously, listen, it's a double-digit point spread, big point spread, 13. Based on previous point spreads, and like, you know, the Bills have been getting all kinds of credit in the market, you know, 12.5, 13 at LA last week. And the Patriots not getting a ton of credit. I mean, they were 7 to 7.5 point underdogs in that game in Denver. Of course, they win outright. The market would suggest that this would be probably closer to like 14 and a half. So you go, okay, like the value is technically on the Bills at this point. And of course, we know the Bills are capable of blowing teams out at home who they are much better than. And we haven't had that situation very often this season. Last time we did was the Jets. I think the Jets right now, somewhat of a comparable team to the Patriots, maybe even better, depending on how you look at it. So I kind of don't really want anything to do with the Patriots here, but I'm obviously not dying to lay the big number here with the Bills. What I am going to do is I'm going to just cheer for Josh Allen to absolutely just ravage the Patriots and just rack up stats and obviously get this win. Because my big thing right now is that Josh Allen is the guy who's the only guy I think who can sort of track down Lamar Jackson for the MVP. And the way, and it drives me nuts, but this is the life we live. The way that awards are being sort of talked about is so short-sighted and so, what have you done lately? And we saw it with the Heisman Trophy, right? Where like no one watched Jaden Daniels play win a game all season long. That was relevant, right? It was all highlights of like, look at Jaden Daniels just like lighting it up against Army, and like Georgia State's got nothing for Jaden Daniels, right? And the stats just pile up and pile up and pile up. Michael Penix was halfway through the season was the favorite, a minus favorite to win the Heisman Trophy. And they literally won all the rest of their games. He had, comeback play and big throw after big throw, led the country in passing yards, and didn't win the Heisman Trophy because all anybody did at the very end was say to themselves, like, well, it wasn't Bo Nix because he lost to Penix, by the way. And we just looked at the stats and said, oh, look at the video game numbers that Jaden Daniels put up. It's like, yeah, we watched it against the good teams, and it was only kind of okay against the good teams, whereas Michael Penix is actually winning. All that is to say, like, we just had the exact same situation with Lamar Jackson on Monday night against the 49ers. Where you and I have talked about, and you're a big 49ers fan, but you're like, Brock Purdy, like, this is great. Love that he's involved. He's so much better than Jimmy G. This guy's not the most valuable player in the NFL, right? Like, that was always kind of nuts. And so he gets intercepted 4 times. And the last time I checked, Lamar Jackson wasn't playing corner out there, playing safety, like jumping routes and intercepting these passes. And so Brock Purdy gets like launched into oblivion. And I'm okay with that because it never felt sort of right that he should be this like definitive favorite. We just didn't really have another choice. We are now at we don't really have another choice stage when it comes to Lamar Jackson, who is literally like 12 touchdowns behind Josh Allen and like 400 yards behind Josh Allen. And I get why Lamar Jackson's the favorite, because there quite literally isn't anybody left, because people can't seem to decide whether Tyreek Hill and Tua Tagovailoa are the MVP, candidate from the Dolphins. In the same way that people couldn't really decide, even Brock Purdy couldn't decide whether he was the MVP, or that Christian McCaffrey was the MVP. So I just look at it and I go like, okay, listen, Lamar Jackson, they win out, right? The Bills lose this weekend. Maybe they lose to Miami. Like, Lamar Jackson MVP, I totally get it. Would never in a million years bet it at -170, -180. Because if you want to do that, just bet the Ravens on the money line this week, especially with this number down to like close to -3. You can get a better price on the money line this week. And by the way, you get your money now, and you don't have to sweat like a vote and an announcement in mid-February. Like, you don't have to do any of that crap. Just bet it now. So like, if you feel that strongly about Lamar Jackson, cool. If you already have a Lamar Jackson ticket, you're cool there too. Like, I get it. I get why you would want to sort of defend that. The thing for me is, though, if Josh Allen wins this game, and if the Dolphins beat the Ravens this week, and then the Dolphins and the Bills have this showdown on potentially Sunday night, the last thing anybody sees, and the Bills win that game, which, by the way, they will be about a coin flip, maybe a slight underdog at Miami. You saw like that Dallas was a slight underdog, and Buffalo and Dallas are pretty much, essentially rated the same. You put those sort of in a 3-game parlay, which I wrote about over the score this week. You put those in a 3-game parlay, it comes out to maybe like at best, like plus 500. Josh Allen's available like 12-1, 13-1 to win the MVP in some places. Like, I know the way the world works, right? Like, we are going to get 2 weeks from now, which doesn't seem like much, but like a day was a lot for Brock Purdy going from -200 to like out of the mix, basically. So like, this stuff changes super, super fast. And when people look up and they go, man, Josh Allen literally dragged this team. The coaching was awful to the point where they literally booted the offensive coordinator midway through the season. The defense was so ravaged, he had to sort of pick up the pace for that. It's not like Stephon Diggs is having a particularly good season, right? Like, he has literally done it all. Like, he's got 12 or 13 rushing touchdowns. He's their goal line back at this point, right? Which, like, by the way, like, essentially saved them from a potential disaster on Saturday against the Chargers, where he scores 2 touchdowns. So it's just like, I think we should be able to look a couple of weeks down the road here and see that this maybe it's going into week 18, especially if the Dolphins beat the Ravens. And by the way, if the Dolphins don't beat the Ravens, the game next week between Buffalo and Miami becomes for the division, not just for Buffalo to make the playoffs.
Exactly.
So now you're sitting there, and even if the Ravens have done it, they've got the number 1 seed, blah, 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 blah. You're then comparing a division winner with a division winner, with Josh Allen having the sort of narrative idea of him strapping everybody on his back and them ending up winning the division and him having the better statistics. Whereas like and I use quotation marks there, all Lamar Jackson is going to have is this idea that he's the quarterback on the best team, which like will get you a long way.
Yeah.
But if there's a better candidate, which again, there isn't right now, we are looking ahead to the next 2 weeks. If there's only one guy who I think can become a better candidate, or is sort of more likely than his odds are to become a better candidate, and that's Josh Allen. So just worth sort of mentioning there, if you haven't read the article or read the tweets or whatever, that's why I think Josh Allen is the good bet right now. And then we'll sort of see what happens, right? Listen, they could lose to the Patriots and it's all over here, but we're talking about, again, a small price to pay for a decent sized payout on Josh Allen to win the MVP.
Yeah, super interesting stuff. Bills to win for sure. I'm not comfortable with the 13 points though, but who knows? Who knows, right? Raiders at the Colts. Colts favored by 3.5 points at home here. I'm looking at my pick that says Raiders plus 3.5, and I don't even like it as I'm staring at it. The 3.5, as mentioned, as I've said, it's a theme. The extra half point has me lean and take the hook as always. But I'm looking at it and I'm thinking the Raiders last week, was that more about them winning said game, or was that was a jump up, huge celebration game? Antonio Pierce talked about how before the game, his whole narrative to them was enough is enough. We have to win this game against the Chiefs. We've lost to them so many times, blah, 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 blah. So now without all of that, and it's not like their offense did anything last week.
Right.
How do I view the Raiders this week against the Colts? That's my question to you here.
Yeah.
I reluctantly sit on the Raiders plus 3.5.
I tell you what I'd like less? I'd like Colts minus 3.5 less than you like the Raiders plus 3.5.
Fair.
Because I mean, fundamentally, that's the pricing that we're sort of talking about here, right?
Yeah.
And again, we get caught up in, what did the team do last week? And then judging the team by what they did last week, expecting them to do it again this week.
Yeah.
Whereas what you want to look at when it comes to last week or the week before is how the market was treating that team and how the market is treating that team now.
Mm-hmm.
This is a Colts team that was -1 against the Steelers and Mitch Trubisky at home 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
And that was with a healthy, no concerns, Michael Pittman.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the Raiders any worse than the Trubisky Steelers right now. And listen, man, the Raiders are nuts, right? They literally went from getting shut out in a 3-0 game to scoring 63 to then beating Kansas City in Kansas City without the use of a quarterback for 3 quarters.
Yeah.
What are we supposed to expect from the Raiders, right? That we would point to any one of those games and be like, well, this is the Raiders. This is what they are.
Yeah.
And I think they had the bye week the week before that, right? So if you have this sort of line of demarcation on their season being post-bye week, these are 3 of the wackiest results you could possibly have.
Correct.
But the Colts, by the way, since that -1 against the Steelers situation, they went and they looked like garbage against Atlanta. So it's not last week, though, the Colts, they are cooking with gasoline right now. And yet this line has gone from -3 to -3.5. This opened at 3 for the Colts and apparently took enough money to get this up to this way. I think the Raiders could win this game outright. I think I imagine they probably need the use of the quarterback to throw the football to complete a pass this time around.
Yeah.
But just because they didn't need him to do it last week doesn't mean he can't do it this week against a pretty shoddy Colts secondary that made Taylor Heineke look quite functional last week. So, again, give me 3.5 points here against a Colts team that when have they been 3.5 point favorites against anyone? Sure, they have won games. By 3.5 points, but they haven't been required to essentially all season long. I haven't gone through the games necessarily, but offhand, I can't really think of a situation where Colts minus 3.5 was a particularly good idea. And I don't think that's the case for week 17.
Oh, I mean, thank you for solidifying this pick here of the Raiders plus 3.5. That's why I enjoy these conversations so much. We'll move on and continue with the Niners, who are 12-point favorites on the road in Washington. We mentioned earlier, Niners getting embarrassed on Christmas Day at home. I don't want to get too deep into it because I feel like I'll save this talk for the playoffs, but I feel like Shanahan, the playbook there, kind of got a little too cute early on in the game. You're in the red zone, hand the ball off to your MVP running back and chill out on the Brock Purdy. We're going to sit back in the pocket and try to make some plays here. Mind you, I'm sure Shanahan will say, I wouldn't have Brock Purdy make that read and throw the ball where he threw the ball, but whatever. Story for another day. Important part here is 12 points is a lot, but I feel like the Niners bounce back. Prime candidate here being those Washington Commanders playing out the string. I feel like they've been playing up the string for 2 months now.
Yeah.
It's Rivera, right? He's been chilling on that sideline. So 12 points doesn't scare me at all. My best advice would be to let the game start, hope the Commanders can at least get a field goal or something, and then hit the Niners at maybe a slightly lower number, maybe, but you might not even have that time.
Cue the guy hiding behind the tree, rubbing his hands together, gif for Sheldon if there's a live opportunity on the 49ers here. I mean, I guess the best chances of that, right? Like obviously Jacoby Brissett is in this game. This line is 13.5. They announced that he is going to start, which again, like, it's just so funny. It's like Sam Howell, like, why? What is Jacoby Brissett going to do to like improve things for you? I mean, like, oh yeah, he might win. Well, it's like, okay, cool. So you get a worse draft pick. Like that's the idea. Like just let Sam Howell play. Like this idea that we've thrown Sam Howell like out into the yard here doesn't really make any sense. But neither here nor there. Point is like, does the result of this game change? And I literally mean like the score of this game change because Jacoby Brissett is in this game. And like, I don't really think it does, right? So like, do you want minus 13.5 with Sam Howell? Like, probably did. Do you want minus 12 with Jacoby Brissett? I probably do, right? Like, it's still like, like you said, bounce back scenario against, literally the worst pass defense in the league that like gets blown out at home on the regular. Buffalo, Miami, etc. Right? So it's like not worried about the home field advantage because like there kind of isn't going to be one. Can't imagine there being that many people in the stands because as much as the good vibes in Washington existed in those first few weeks, they do not anymore. And, as we talked about, right, with that loss, now things are getting a little dicey when it comes to the, the top, the number one seed in the bye in the NFC. So like a game that matters to the 49ers. So, and this is a play on San Francisco. Like you said, like, do you wait because the idea that, Jacoby Brissett is capable or more capable than Sam Howell of, working the first 15 plays, right? Working the script. Because Sam Howell wasn't, because they found themselves down 1 billion points. And again, like speaking of backup quarterbacks swooping in to ruin, point spread covers, Jacoby Brissett did that to me with the Jets last week. But like he did it against a team that had thought they had won the game, right? The Niners aren't going to be that sort of frivolous when it comes to this game. So like maybe there's like you said, an early field goal, but honestly, like what's an early field goal going to get you? Minus 10.5.
It's true.
Just bet the minus, if you feel that strongly about it, just bet the minus 12. Like, because honestly, the 49ers should put up 50 points. And like, what is Jacoby Brissett going to do against an actually locked in version of the 49ers versus like, keeping it pretty casual second half defense that the Rams and Jets put out there these last couple of weeks.
Yeah, Niners roll. Panthers at the Jags. Jags laying 6.5 points. I'm assuming this has to be the Trevor Lawrence line, despite the fact that, they picked up an extra quarterback. Trevor Lawrence, strained shoulder, I think is what the diagnosis is. But as mentioned earlier in the pod, in my fantasy league, my two quarterbacks of Patrick Mahomes and Trevor Lawrence, I can't wait it out to see what's going to happen with Trevor Lawrence. So I got to start my third quarterback, Joe Flacco, Thursday night. So, hey, send me some positive vibes here as I'm just rolling the dice in fantasy football finals. But in terms of this, I look up and I see that I'm on Carolina. I can't tell you the last time that I've been on Carolina. We got to go back to the first time you convinced me that they were going to win a game.
Because I couldn't get you on the Falcons or against the Falcons a couple weeks ago, right?
For sure. Yeah. But this line just seems like it's too many points here. And if there's even a thought of CJ Beathard music, like there's no way this is a CJ Beathard line, right? Like that can't be possible.
No, I don't think so. Well, okay, let's put it this way. So weekly reminder that all these guys, and when I talk about these guys, I mean these coaches, you can win a Super Bowl and like, cool, right? Like Andy Reid ends up winning a Super Bowl after like 20 years of everybody making fun of Andy Reid and his time, inability to figure out how timeouts work. And
just took him Patrick Mahomes.
Right. And and Doug Peterson's won a Super Bowl. Okay, cool. But I watched you, man, and I watched you put Trevor Lawrence out there in a game that was 30-0 against Tampa Bay. And it isn't like, oh, my guy was perfectly healthy, I could never see this sort of thing coming. It was, your dude literally has had a knee injury at one point this season. I think that was like week 7. Your guy had a pretty horrific ankle scenario happening
ankle
like
sprain,
3 weeks ago, and was like in concussion protocol like all week leading up. So maybe having him out there and then having him, because he's a competitor and he's a natural athlete, et cetera, taking off and running and getting his shoulder banged up is about as dumb a thing as you could possibly do. And so don't tell me, oh, this guy won a Super Bowl, like he has to be some sort of like genius or whatever. No, somebody's got to win the Super Bowl. And if it's 32 guys just clunking each other, their heads into each other all, for 18 weeks and somebody has to come out of it with a victory, like no wonder Bill Belichick, who by the way, like nobody thinks is a good coach anymore because like he hasn't won anything or come close to winning anything without Tom Brady. It's like, no wonder that guy's stacking rings when you see the rest of these clowns, right? Like it was like a weird thing when the Patriots didn't win a Super Bowl. Like historically incredible stuff had to happen when the Patriots didn't win Super Bowls, right? Like the Seahawks had to have like a legendary Legion of Boom style defense, and Peyton Manning had to go to the Broncos and throw like 50 touchdown passes. And it was like, yeah, that's kind of the only way the Patriots didn't win Super Bowl, because these guys by and large are
the craziest plays ever in Super Bowl history.
Yeah, in the case of the Giants, right? And it's like, yeah, that like somebody else can win it, but like these guys are going to make the dumbest decisions on the regular, man. And so that's Doug Peterson. And so as far as this line is concerned, as far as this game is concerned, like I think it's a halfway number. Okay. And I only think that because of the way the Jags have been rated, right? And so, which is again why we do ratings, right? And so normally, think about it this way: like if this game was a month ago, think about Jags Cincinnati, for example. 10.5 point spread.
Yeah.
Right? Like this line against Carolina has got to be like kind of close to 10. Like I know at the time we didn't, we thought Jake Browning was truly horrendous and Bengals didn't care anymore or whatever. So like maybe Carolina wouldn't be more than 10.5, but like they'd be 8.
Yeah.
And so like if Trevor Lawrence is healthy, I would expect this line to be like 8, and it's not. Okay. Problem is, as you mentioned, if that's CJ Beathard's music, it's not 6. It's not 6.5.
Okay.
I don't think, right? Like, and I know it's Carolina. So like, it's not gonna be like 2, right? It's like it's a Carolina, right? So like, okay, maybe it's -3.5 if it's CJ Beathard, right? Like, I'm trying to think of like what's the number you would play the Jags at with CJ Beathard, and like. It would be 3 for me, and so it's like 3.5 is like the fair price to like not have me like really excited about it, or at least marginally excited about it. So that's why I think it's kind of in between. Now you could say, listen, man, you were on Carolina 2 weeks ago, they won. You're on Carolina, I think it was 4 weeks ago, they covered. They covered and almost won, despite the fact that they were down 2 touchdowns with 7.5 minutes to go against the Packers last week. This Panthers team is playing better. So like their rating has to go up. Nothing crazy, but like from like worst team in the league to like maybe worst team in the league, right? Like there needs to be other contenders right now for worst team in the league, because Bryce Young is also playing a little bit better. And this Jags team is free falling. Right. And like, yeah, you can go on like a losing streak and turn things around, but it's going to be really hard to do that if your backup quarterback is in, or if your quarterback is like brain injury, leg injury, shoulder injury combination. Yeah. I like the idea that the Panthers could win this game outright. Again, Jags home field advantage, never really been a big thing. I kind of want Trevor Lawrence. I was all about Trevor Lawrence getting announced in for that game against the BUCS so that I could get the pick'em on the BUCS, and we got that, and it didn't really matter. And I'm sure if CJ Beathard had played and the line was -3.5, the BUCS would have won by 30 points anyway. So maybe it wouldn't have mattered either way. But like, if we get a +7, a +7.5 with a theoretically like green lit Trevor Lawrence, like that would be cool. But unlike the CJ Stroud thing, where it's like, wait, let's see how high it goes. Honestly, I kind of just want the 6.5 and just go to war with that. Right. And it's like 7 would be cool or whatever. It's like, kind of don't think that's going to matter with this version of the Jags, the way that this has been sort of, shaking down. And the idea that, by the way, like, I don't necessarily know that Trevor Lawrence is going to make it through this game, because the way that he's, obviously things have gone for him in the last literally 3 games where he has gotten hurt in every single one of them. Why would you think that? So, again, you can grab the plus 6.5 now if you want to get a little loose with it. Try to get 7 with Lawrence getting, announced in. Again, my concern would be that CJ Beathard gets announced in and we get down to like a -3 situation. And then it's like, I'm still probably betting the Panthers, but that's a pretty cheap price.
Yeah, no, totally with you there. And basically my takeaway is, so you're telling me I should start Joe Flacco. No, I'm joking. I'm joking.
I don't know. You're getting it done. Listen, and I hope people can just understand the absolute loathing I have for fantasy football every time you mention it.
Of course.
Even though I partake, I just loathe it.
Bit.
Yeah, it totally is. I don't know how you're getting it done with the Joe Flacco's and Trevor Lawrence's of the world, but that's all you need to know about fantasy football. And
Puka,
that somehow, wait, you can just say Puka, but he doesn't have 5 touchdowns a game. I don't know how you're doing it, man. But kudos to you for doing it.
Listen, man, Puka, Kyron, doing work, man.
I'm just gonna walk around and say that, during the offseason, people are like, "Hey, man, great shot on the 3rd tee there." I'll be like, "Man, Puka Nacua, what? It's a 7-iron." Yeah, Puka Nacua. You did it.
You'd be surprised, man. You'd be surprised. Yeah, so I'm on the Panthers plus 6.5, which does actually surprise me. This game, as well as we move on to the Chargers at the Broncos. And the Chargers and the Broncos are an interesting one because, of course, we saw your man's Easton Stick look a little bit better in the second go around, but the headline here is the benched Russell Wilson.
Yeah.
And I mean, we've talked about this all season, the disdain that we could tell that Sean Payton has for Russell Wilson. They're laying 3.5 points in this game. And I'm going to be honest with you. This is not sound betting advice by any stretch.
Oh.
But I feel like if I'm Sean Payton, I got to come up with my A++ plays, right? If I make this move that I'm benching Russell Wilson at this point of the season, and then all these stories are leaking about how they tried to get him to restructure his contract weeks ago, and he said no, and then they threatened that they were going to bench him if he didn't do it. And so you've had this man's playing for multiple weeks while telling him you're going to, what? It almost makes me like Russell Wilson, which is, if you know me, is not a place that I'm ever on. I say all that to say I'm on Denver -3.5. Because Sean Payton, if you're doing this move, bro, at this point, you got to be pulling out your A++ plays to win this game against, again, Easton Stick and the Chargers.
Maybe I'm wrong, but that sounds like fully decent betting advice, man. Because it's
okay.
It's true. I mean, I'll swoop in and say this to you, right? If the problem is the quarterback and they remove the quarterback, why does the line go down from what was essentially 6.5, 7, somewhere, kind of in between there, at least from my projection, and the opening line was 6.5. Why does the line go down to 3? And the market was like, "You're right, sir. Why are we down to -3? And everybody bet the Broncos -3, and now we're at -3.5. And I'm still pretty cool with it, right? Because look at it this way, right? Who's better right now, the Chargers or the Patriots?
That's a good one,
right? It's even when the Chargers had Justin Herbert, it was 6-0 in Foxborough 3 weeks ago, and that was with Keenan Allen and Justin Herbert. And so the Chargers are going to be 3.5 points, or even going to be equal to the Patriots. The Easton Stick Chargers are going to be equal to the Patriots, or even slightly better, because that number was 7.5 last week.
Yeah.
And it's so there's 2 different things there, right? It's one, if this number was 6.5, we'd be sitting here going are we positive the Chargers are better than the Patriots? And then 2, now we're going, are we positive Jarrett Stidham, who, by the way, had this exact same situation, he is used to it. You can make the case they literally signed him in the offseason because he's had experience in this exact situation. Because, when Sean Payton took over, I imagine they went through the fine print on the Russell Wilson contract, because he was never a Russell Wilson guy in the first place. And they probably noticed hey, like we can only get to a certain point here, and we may have to like kick him to the curb in the last couple of weeks, a la Derek Carr. Who's the guy who has some experience with that sort of thing? Jared Stidham does. And you'd be like, laugh that off. But the Broncos, speaking of like the Bengals in the same way, like still very much in play for a playoff spot. Again, a couple of things have to go their way. They don't just get to like win and they're in type situation, but the stuff that can go their way is very sort of feasible. And yet they still do this. Like that's how little they like Russell Wilson. So the point is, if the own team doesn't like Russell Wilson and all the stuff that you just sort of said, right? And like obviously kicking ourselves for not just betting the bleep out of the Patriots last week when we talked about how that line was like a little bit too high. Like, yeah, if they don't like him and have never liked him, and now they're just going to literally anybody else, or at least somebody who has sort of professional experience, like, yeah, you're right, man. They are going to go to the good plays. Or, you know what I mean? Like, you can see them opening this thing up and just being like, okay, this guy's slinging it. He doesn't give a bleep. Like, he didn't care again, when the Raiders played the 49ers last year.
Yeah.
Why is this guy going to care against the Chargers, right? And the Chargers had their Saturday night Super Bowl against the Bills, new coach bump, get your man Giff and JoJo on the ones and twos. And it's like, yeah, they did it. They got their bump, and like they're just going to go back to like being the Chargers. And that doesn't mean they're going to go up 63 points and lose by 40. I think it means they lose by 4 or more against the Broncos this week, and the Broncos playoff hopes stay alive, and we might end up with a playoff game started by Jarrett Stidham, which would just be so this season. I can't even like believe it.
Does Russell Wilson still go and like show up and dress and be on the sidelines and stuff?
No,
he's at home.
It's a Derek Carr situation, right? Like he's at home. Yeah.
He's at home with Sierra, which I think is a win-win for everyone.
Listen, man, Russell Wilson's going to be just fine. Like overall in life, like, yeah, he's a pain in our butt. Like the whole, like, God's got me, like I'm good to go. And it's like, yeah, man, we know God's got you.
Mm-hmm.
We have eyes.
Yeah.
We've read the amount on your contract, right? Mm-hmm. Like we know all this stuff.
It's like, I wouldn't restructure my contract either. It's like take less money or take my money and go home to my wife.
Nobody with a brain was going like, oh, how's Russell Wilson doing with this thing? You know what I mean? It's like, okay, cool.
Will he be okay?
Oh, let's check in. Check in with Rusty Will.
And we close out, which, so many games going on and a concerted effort, obviously, to put big time games in certain windows. And somehow we end up with the Packers and Vikings on Sunday Night Football.
Yeah.
How? I don't know. But Vikings 2-point favorites at home. I don't know. I mean, I'm being very honest here. The Packers, both these teams still have a glimmer of hope. Right? They need some stuff to go certain ways, of course. But the one thing I will stand on, Vikings at home, Justin Jefferson being back. Mm-hmm. This might sound like the most obvious statement ever, but if you watch some of the plays my guy was making, welcome back to Justin Jefferson. And it gives their offense a much needed kick in the butt and makes their crappy quarterback situation look a little bit better, regardless of whoever's back there. Give me the Vikings, pardon me, laying a short number at 2. I'll take that in this instance.
I tell you what, I got a deal for you. How about pick 'em?
Whoa.
Yeah. So we've seen a line move here in like beep, 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 beep on Thursday afternoon. I think I'd have to scroll through it. I don't have that kind of time because we're doing a podcast. I think we will see that Jaren Hall is going to be the starting quarterback for the Vikings. And that, I suppose, is enough for the line to fall from -2 to pick them. And you go 2 points for Jaren Hall. And it's like, the reality is that's not really a move, right? Like 2 to pick them is not anything.
Yeah.
It means that you don't have to worry about a 1-point Vikings victory or a 2-point Vikings victory being a push. It means you just get them to win outright. Also means that you got a pretty unknown type quantity here with Jaren Hall. I've been I've said on the podcast, like I was hoping that we got to see a little more of Jaren Hall because he got hurt so early in that game, that one game that he started against Atlanta, I believe it was. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be my other card though. I am under on the Vikings. I am over on the Packers, and you know what I mean? Or I have Packers to make the playoffs, and I'm under on the Vikings. This is that card. I I guess my case to the Packers, my plea to the Packers would be, for the love of God, like, beat Jaron Hall, like,
Fair, totally
but
fair.
I can understand how they might not. And like, if all things were equal, I could totally see myself theoretically taking Minnesota, because like, not things aren't necessarily going super swimmingly in Green Bay either, with Jair Alexander getting loose and all sorts of tomfoolery going on there. But yeah, Sunday night, was this game flexed in, or like, what was the deal with this game?
I have no idea. That's what I'm saying. I
It's
don't
been on
understand
the schedule
how.
for a while, and I don't remember seeing, like, it feels like a Kansas City Cincinnati thing where like maybe they got flexed out and this game got flexed in. That being said, it's as high leverage of a game as there is this week, right? Again, I'll refer back to the ESPN playoff machine.
Yeah, that's true.
There's a lot of scenarios where you click on Green Bay as the winner of this game. Guess who's in the playoffs? Green Bay. You click on Minnesota as the winner of this game. Guess who's in the playoffs? Minnesota. Now, obviously, neither of those teams are guaranteed to be in the playoffs. I'm just saying, like, how things set up going forward in the season. This is sort of a pre-win and you're in, loser goes home type of situation, which we had a couple of last week. And this is this week's biggest one.
Yeah, super interesting stuff for sure. And as much as I complain, where do you think I'm going to be Sunday night other than on my couch?
Yeah.
Completely locked in and enjoying this game.
I thought you were going to say your man's Ryan Seacrest is where you were going to be on Sunday night. But I guess.
Oh, Sunday night is Sunday night is
it's a little
New Year's Eve
thing called New Year's Eve. Yeah, I thought you were gonna be.
I don't know the days of the week, man.
I gotta be honest. New Year's Rockin' Eve with Seacrest.
I gotta be honest. I don't know the days of the week. I don't know what days what day is it today? I don't know. But yeah, in between now and said New Year's Eve, where can the good people find you to get all the updates, including New Year's Eve plans?
Yeah, I mean, listen, sadly, these are the New Year's Eve plans. 10 games at 1:00, bringing us right into the ball dropping with your guy, Seacrest. At MRUS Authentic on Twitter, everything that I write. We're heavy into bowl season, so it's just getting peppered with bowls as we're talking right now. I've been watching SMU go from a 4-point lead to oblivion. And it doesn't appear that they're going to cover a -10 point spread. You never know with this stuff when it comes to bowl season, but the exciting stuff is coming. Obviously, you mentioned New Year's Eve. Let's hope you can still find my stuff on New Year's Day. Let's hope it's not a countdown for my life or my, social media or whatever. We get the semifinals and obviously 3 games before that. Always kind of a fun day. New Year's Day, your level of hangover, how deep does it go? Are you still battling it in the fourth quarter of the Fiesta Bowl, or or are you ready and willing to rock it for the Rose Bowl come 5:00? So one of the it's not necessarily even a sneaky fun day of the year, it just is a fun day of the year. So hopefully this football means I dial it back a little bit on the old bourbon on Sunday, and I don't feel like I've been run over by a truck like I have for this podcast.
Yes, lots going on for sure. And of course, you can follow me on the app formerly known as Twitter at Shell Alexander, on Instagram at Sheldon Alexander. Lots going on as we discuss the Raps, we discuss fading the Detroit Pistons as their losing streak continues in the NBA. Lots of stuff going on. New Year's Day, you mentioned a great sports day on New Year's Day. I will definitely be checking out your article to make said sprinklings on the college football playoff. Nice. Indeed. So hopefully the people will do so as well. And we'll be back next week to wrap up the regular season of picks here on the pod. Huge shouts to the people liking and subscribing wherever you're getting the pod. We appreciate the likes. We appreciate the shares. We appreciate the comments and all that other fun stuff. Because, as I always say, I used to pray for times like this to rhyme like this. This is a Clutch Picks Sports Betting Podcast coming to you each and every week. And as always, unpolished and unapologetic. Until next time, see ya.